Hey guys, tonight we're traveling far back in time, to an island where Europe's first great civilization quietly rose, flourished, and eventually disappeared almost without a trace. Before we begin, settle into a comfortable position, perhaps adjust your blanket, and let the busy thoughts of the day slowly drift away. Tonight is not about rushing through history, it's about wandering gently through it, one peaceful step at a time. Our story begins nearly 4,000 years ago on the warm island of Crete, resting peacefully in the eastern Mediterranean Sea. Today, the island is known for its sunny beaches and quiet villages. But long ago, it was home to an advanced society that modern historians call the Minoans. They did not leave behind famous emperors like Rome or towering pyramids like Egypt. Instead, they left beautiful palaces, colorful paintings, and countless mysteries. The sea shaped every part of Minoan life. Gentle waves carried merchants from distant lands, bringing copper from Cyprus, gold from Egypt, fine pottery from the Near East, and stories from places far beyond the horizon. In return, ships sailed away carrying olive oil, wine, carefully crafted pottery, and finely woven cloth. The people of Crete became skilled sailors long before many European societies had grown into organized kingdoms. Unlike many ancient civilizations, the Minoans seemed to value trade more than conquest. Archaeologists have discovered surprisingly few signs of large defensive walls around their greatest cities. This has puzzled historians for more than a century. Perhaps their powerful navy protected them. Or perhaps they lived during a rare period when peaceful trade was more valuable than endless war. The truth remains uncertain, and that uncertainty makes their story even more fascinating. As the first light of morning spread across the island, farmers walked into fertile fields, while fishermen prepared their wooden boats along the coast. Skilled craftsmen shaped clay into elegant vessels, decorated with flowing plants, graceful birds, and playful dolphins. Their artwork celebrated nature far more often than battles, offering us a peaceful glimpse into a world that existed thousands of years before classical Greece began to shine. As the sun climbed a little higher above the hills of Crete, the island slowly filled with quiet activity. Smoke curled gently from kitchen fires, while narrow stone paths carried farmers, traders, and craftsmen toward busy towns. Life moved at an unhurried pace, guided by the seasons rather than clocks. The sound of waves meeting the shore was as familiar as birds singing in the olive trees. At the center of this growing civilization stood remarkable palaces unlike anything else in Europe at the time. These were not simply homes for kings. They served as places where goods were collected, records were kept, religious ceremonies were held, and important decisions were made. The largest of them, at Knossos, contained hundreds of rooms connected by staircases, open courtyards, workshops, and long corridors that twisted in unexpected directions. Walking through the palace would have been an unforgettable experience. Bright red columns supported upper floors, while walls were covered with colorful paintings showing dolphins swimming through blue water, blooming flowers, graceful women in elegant clothing, and young athletes performing daring leaps over powerful bulls. Sunlight poured into open spaces, creating a warm and welcoming atmosphere that felt very different from the dark stone fortresses built by later kingdoms. The palace was also astonishingly practical. Large clay jars lined the storerooms, holding grain, olive oil, wine, and honey collected from across the island. Careful officials counted supplies and recorded them using symbols pressed into damp clay tablets. Although many of these tablets still survive today, their writing remains a mystery. The script, known as Linear A, has never been fully understood, leaving the voices of the Minoans locked behind silent symbols that no one can completely read. Even after more than 100 years of research, historians can only guess what those records truly said. They may have listed taxes, trade goods, festivals, or messages between officials. Somewhere inside those unread words could be the names of forgotten rulers, ordinary families, or stories that vanished thousands of years ago. The answers are still waiting, hidden within a language that continues to keep its secrets. Life inside the palace followed a gentle rhythm that changed with the seasons. During the harvest months, Long lines of workers carried baskets filled with grain, grapes, and olives toward the great storerooms. Massive clay jars, some taller than an average person, stood neatly arranged along the walls. They held enough olive oil, wine, honey, and grain to feed thousands of people. Each delivery was carefully counted, measured, and recorded by experienced scribes, whose quiet work kept the kingdom running smoothly. Outside the palace, the island stretched across rolling hills, green valleys, and rocky mountains. Small villages rested among olive groves that had been cared for by generations of farming families. Shepherds guided their sheep and goats across gentle slopes, while fishermen returned each afternoon with fresh catches from the calm Mediterranean waters. For many people, life moved slowly, following the rising and setting of the sun rather than the commands of kings. The sea remained the island's greatest gift. Minoan ships sailed farther than most European vessels of their time, connecting Crete with Egypt, Cyprus, the Levant, and the Greek mainland. Every successful voyage brought new ideas along with valuable goods. Foreign visitors admired the skill of Cretan craftsmen, whose pottery was so finely made that it became highly desired throughout the ancient world. Their elegant cups, painted jars, and delicate ornaments carried the reputation of Crete far beyond its shores. Religion also played an important role in everyday life. Instead of enormous stone temples, many ceremonies seem to have taken place in open courtyards, mountain sanctuaries, and quiet caves hidden among the hills. Archaeologists have discovered small statues of women raising their arms toward the sky, along with the famous snake goddess figures, suggesting that nature, fertility, and the changing seasons held deep spiritual meaning. Although many details remain uncertain, the evidence paints a picture of a people who felt closely connected to the land, the sea, and the natural world around them. As evening settled over the island, warm light reflected across the palace walls, and the busy sounds of the day slowly faded. Lamps flickered softly inside stone rooms while gentle waves continued their endless conversation with the shore, just as they had for countless generations before, carrying the quiet promise that tomorrow would begin much the same as today. Years passed, and the people of Crete continued to prosper. Their ships crossed familiar sea routes with remarkable confidence, guided by experienced captains who understood the changing winds and restless currents of the Mediterranean. Every successful journey strengthened the island's reputation as a center of trade. Merchants from distant kingdoms recognized Minoan pottery at a glance, and many gladly exchanged valuable metals, fine fabrics, and rare stones for the carefully crafted goods produced on Crete. The craftsmen never seemed to stop improving their skills. Potters shaped smooth clay with steady hands before decorating each piece with flowing octopuses, graceful fish, curling waves, and delicate flowers. Goldsmiths transformed tiny pieces of precious metal into elegant necklaces and rings, while stone carvers created detailed seals that were both practical and beautiful. Even ordinary household objects were often made with surprising care, suggesting that beauty was appreciated in everyday life, not reserved only for the wealthy. One of the most remarkable features of the great palaces was something visitors could not immediately see. Hidden beneath the floors were carefully designed drainage systems that carried away wastewater. Fresh water reached different parts of the buildings through channels that displayed an impressive understanding of engineering. Thousands of years later, archaeologists would be amazed to discover how advanced these systems were for such an early civilization. They revealed that comfort, cleanliness, and careful planning were valued far more than many had expected. Despite their growing wealth, the Minoans remained surrounded by the unpredictable forces of nature. The island occasionally trembled beneath their feet as earthquakes reminded everyone that the ground itself was never completely still. Most of the time, the shaking was brief, causing little more than cracked walls or fallen pottery. People repaired the damage, rebuilt what had collapsed, and continued with their daily routines. It became another part of life on an island shaped by powerful natural forces. No one realized that these gentle warnings were only the beginning. Far beyond the northern horizon, another island rested quietly in the blue sea. Hidden beneath its peaceful appearance was a volcano of extraordinary power. For generations, it had remained silent, giving little reason for concern. But deep beneath the earth, slow changes were already taking place. The people of Crete could not hear them, could not see them, and could not imagine that events unfolding many miles away would eventually change the course of their civilization forever. Across the sea, life on Crete continued as if nothing could disturb its steady rhythm. At sunrise, fishing boats slipped quietly from sheltered harbors, their wooden hulls cutting through calm blue water. Farmers tended vineyards and olive trees that had supported their families for generations. In the palace workshops, skilled artisans painted fresh pottery with elegant spirals, dolphins, lilies, and octopuses, creating designs that seemed to capture the movement of the sea itself. The markets of Knossos were filled with quiet conversations. Merchants weighed copper ingots, counted jars of fragrant olive oil, and inspected colorful textiles before loading them onto waiting ships. Scribes sat nearby with damp clay tablets, carefully recording each shipment in the mysterious script we now call Linear A. Every mark they pressed into the clay had meaning, yet after thousands of years, those meanings remain locked away, leaving modern historians to wonder what stories have been lost forever. Travelers arriving from Egypt or the Near East often found Crete unlike any place they had visited before. Instead of towering monuments celebrating military victories, they discovered lively courtyards, graceful buildings, and walls covered with scenes of dancing, flowers, birds, and playful sea creatures. The island seemed to celebrate beauty as much as power, and trade as much as conquest. Still, nature quietly reminded everyone who truly ruled the world. From time to time, the ground trembled beneath the island. Cups rattled on shelves, lamps swayed gently, and people paused for a moment before returning to their work. Earthquakes were familiar visitors in this part of the Mediterranean. Buildings were repaired, walls strengthened, and life moved forward once again. Far to the north, however, another island was beginning to change. Deep beneath its surface, molten rock slowly gathered pressure inside a vast underground chamber. No messenger could carry news of what was happening below the earth, because no one knew. The sea remained calm, the skies stayed clear, and daily life continued in peaceful routine. Yet history was quietly approaching a turning point, one that would leave echoes across the ancient world and begin the long, mysterious decline of Europe's first great civilization. For many years, the people of Crete believed the sea would always provide for them. Their ships continued to travel from harbor to harbor, linking distant cultures through trade rather than conquest. Experienced sailors learned to read the stars, the wind, and the changing color of the water. These skills allowed them to cross long distances with remarkable confidence, making the Minoans one of the greatest maritime powers of their age. The palace at Knossos remained the heart of this growing network. Every week, new goods arrived from across the Mediterranean. Copper, ivory, fine stones, and rare spices entered its storerooms, while beautifully crafted pottery, olive oil, and woven cloth departed for foreign ports. The palace was more than a royal residence. It was a center of government, commerce, religion, and craftsmanship, where hundreds of people worked together to keep the island prosperous. Yet small changes were beginning to appear. A few trade voyages took longer than expected. Some merchants returned with stories of unusual earthquakes on distant islands. Others spoke of strange sounds that seemed to come from beneath the earth. Such tales spread through the ports but were soon forgotten. The Mediterranean was full of rumors, and experienced sailors knew that not every story deserved attention. On Crete itself, life remained peaceful. Children played in sunny courtyards, priests prepared quiet ceremonies, and artists continued painting fresh scenes of dolphins, flowers, and graceful birds. No one could imagine that these peaceful paintings would one day survive long after the civilization that created them had disappeared. Beyond the northern horizon, however, the island of Thera was changing. Deep below its mountains, pressure continued to build inside an enormous volcano. The Earth was preparing for one of the largest eruptions in human history. The people of Crete could not see it, hear it, or understand what was coming. For now, the sea remained calm, the winds were gentle, and Europe's first great civilization carried on with quiet confidence. unaware that its golden age was slowly nearing its end. The first signs were so subtle that almost no one considered them important. Fishermen noticed that the sea sometimes behaved strangely, becoming unusually quiet before returning to normal. A few birds changed their familiar paths, while animals occasionally seemed restless without any clear reason. To the people of Crete, these were simply curious moments in ordinary life. Nature often behaved in unexpected ways, and there was little reason to fear them. Trade continued across the Mediterranean as it always had. Merchant ships sailed toward Egypt, Cyprus, and the Greek mainland, carrying jars of olive oil, fine pottery, and carefully woven cloth. In return, they brought copper, gold, ivory, and ideas from distant cultures. Every successful voyage strengthened the island's economy and reinforced its position as the center of a vast trading network. Inside the palace at Knossos, scribes pressed fresh symbols into damp clay tablets, recording deliveries and storing important records for future reference. Craftsmen worked patiently in nearby rooms, polishing jewelry or painting elegant sea creatures onto smooth pottery. The palace echoed with quiet conversation, footsteps across stone floors, and the steady rhythm of everyday work. Far beyond the horizon, however, the volcano on the island of Thera was becoming increasingly unstable. Powerful earthquakes shook the island, forcing many of its residents to leave their homes. Ash began to drift into the sky, though it remained far from Crete. The Minoans could not see the growing danger. Their ships still crossed peaceful waters, and the sun continued to rise over the island each morning. History often changes without warning. Great civilizations rarely recognize the moment when their fortunes begin to shift. For the Minoans, that moment was drawing closer with every passing day. Soon, the Mediterranean would witness an event so powerful that its memory would survive for thousands of years, preserved in ancient legends, buried beneath layers of ash, and hidden inside one of history's greatest forgotten stories. On a clear morning, far to the north of Crete, the island of Thera awakened with a deep rumble from beneath the earth. At first, it sounded like distant thunder rolling beneath the mountains. Then the ground shook again, stronger than before. Cracks appeared across rocky hillsides, and clouds of dust drifted into the air. Many families gathered what they could and hurried toward the coast, hoping the restless island would soon become quiet again. The volcano had other plans. Pressure had been building underground for centuries. Now there was no stopping it. With unimaginable force, the mountain exploded. A towering column of ash, gas, and rock shot high into the sky, rising farther than anyone could have imagined. Day briefly turned into night as thick clouds spread across the sea. The sound of the eruption echoed across the Mediterranean, reaching places far beyond the island itself. Although Crete was many miles away, its people soon noticed unusual signs. The sky appeared hazy, sunlight seemed weaker, and a fine layer of ash began settling over parts of the island. Most people had never experienced anything like it. Some looked toward the northern horizon with concern, while others continued their daily work, believing the strange weather would soon pass. The greatest danger, however, was still moving across the sea. The enormous explosion had pushed vast amounts of water outward in every direction. Massive waves, far larger than ordinary storms could produce, raced across the Mediterranean. They traveled silently at first, almost invisible in deep water. But as they approached the shores of Crete, they grew taller and more powerful, carrying enough force to destroy harbors, ships, and entire coastal settlements. No messenger could outrun the sea. No warning could arrive in time. The prosperous island that had ruled Mediterranean trade for generations was about to face a disaster unlike anything its people had ever known. Their peaceful world, built over centuries through trade, skill, and quiet confidence, stood only moments away from one of the most devastating natural events in ancient European history. Along the northern coast of Crete, the morning had begun like so many others. Merchants were preparing cargo, fishermen were repairing their nets, and children wandered near the busy harbors, watching ships gently rise and fall with the waves. Nothing seemed unusual at first. The sea was calm, almost strangely calm, as if it had paused to take a long breath. Then something unexpected happened. The water began to pull away from the shoreline. Boats settled awkwardly onto the exposed seabed, and rocks that had been hidden beneath the waves suddenly appeared in the sunlight. Curious people stepped closer, trying to understand what they were seeing. Few had ever witnessed such a strange sight, and no one realized it was a warning. Far across the water, an enormous wall of sea was racing toward the island. Within minutes, the quiet harbor erupted into chaos. A thunderous roar grew louder with every passing second. People turned toward the horizon and saw something almost impossible to believe. A massive wave stretched across the sea, rising higher than houses and moving with terrifying speed. There was little time to react. The wave crashed into the coastline with overwhelming force. Ships were lifted into the air as though they weighed nothing. Stone docks shattered. Warehouses filled with valuable goods disappeared beneath rushing water. Wooden homes broke apart, and fishing boats were carried far inland before being left stranded as the water slowly retreated. Even communities that survived the first wave faced terrible uncertainty. More waves followed, each one bringing fresh destruction. Harbors that had connected Crete to the rest of the Mediterranean were badly damaged, and countless ships, the foundation of Minoan trade and prosperity, were lost. The great palaces farther inland remained standing, but the island had changed forever. This powerful trading network had suffered a devastating blow. Although the Minoan civilization did not disappear in a single day, this disaster marked the beginning of a long decline. The sea that had once made Crete wealthy had suddenly become the source of its greatest tragedy. When the sea finally grew quiet again, an uneasy silence settled across the island. The familiar sounds of busy harbors had vanished. Broken ships rested where streets had once been, and pieces of timber floated gently in sheltered bays. Families searched for loved ones, while survivors gathered whatever food and supplies they could rescue from the ruins. The disaster had passed, but its consequences were only beginning. Messengers traveled between villages carrying news that seemed impossible to believe. Some coastal settlements had been almost completely destroyed. Important ports that connected Crete to distant kingdoms could no longer welcome trading vessels. Warehouses filled with grain, olive oil, and precious goods had been washed away, leaving communities with fewer resources than before. Inside the great palace of Knossos, officials tried to restore order. Scribes continued recording supplies on clay tablets, carefully counting what remained after the catastrophe. Craftsmen repaired damaged buildings, while laborers cleared fallen stones and broken walls. Life had not stopped, but it had become far more difficult. Every day demanded patience, hard work, and hope that better times would return. Trade, the heart of Minoan prosperity, slowed dramatically. Merchant ships that survived the waves faced damaged harbors and uncertain routes. Some foreign traders chose safer destinations, while others simply never returned. The steady flow of copper, ivory, and luxury goods became less reliable, weakening the economy that had supported the island for centuries. Even so, the Minoans refused to give up. They rebuilt homes, repaired roads, and restored parts of their ports. Children once again played in palace courtyards, and artists continued decorating pottery with dolphins, flowers, and graceful sea creatures. Their determination was remarkable, proving that civilizations are often stronger than a single disaster. Yet history rarely changes because of one event alone. The great eruption had weakened Crete, but other challenges were already approaching from beyond the horizon. New powers were rising across the Aegean Sea, watching carefully as the once dominant island slowly struggled to recover. The age of Minoan greatness had not ended overnight, but its brightest days were quietly slipping into the past. Years passed, and although Crete slowly recovered from the disaster, it was no longer the powerful center it had once been. The busy harbors welcomed fewer ships, and some trade routes that had filled the island with wealth gradually shifted elsewhere. Merchants adapted as best they could, but the steady rhythm that had defined Minoan life for centuries was becoming quieter with each passing season. Across the Aegean Sea, another civilization was growing stronger. On the Greek mainland, the Mycenaeans were expanding their influence. They admired many parts of Minoan culture, including its art, architecture, and methods of trade. At first, the two societies exchanged goods and ideas peacefully. But as the balance of power changed, the relationship also began to change. Archaeologists have found evidence suggesting that Mycenaean influence slowly reached Crete. Some palace records began to appear in a different script known as Linear B. Unlike the mysterious Linear A, Linear B has been successfully translated, revealing an early form of the Greek language. This discovery suggests that new rulers or administrators may have taken control of parts of the island. The transition was probably gradual rather than sudden. There was no single moment when the Minoan civilization simply disappeared. Instead, old traditions blended with new customs. Familiar buildings remained standing, but the people managing them were changing. Trade continued, though under different leadership, and the culture that had once shaped the Mediterranean slowly faded into history. Even so, many Minoan achievements survived. Their artistic style influenced later Greek craftsmen. Their knowledge of seafaring continued to inspire sailors across the region. Their palaces, though damaged by time and earthquakes, still stood as reminders of a remarkable civilization that had once flourished long before the rise of classical Greece. Without realizing it, the people of Crete were living through the final chapters of Europe's first great civilization. They could not know that thousands of years later, future generations would search beneath layers of earth, trying to understand who they were, how they lived, and why a civilization so advanced had almost completely vanished from human memory. As generations passed, memories of the old Minoan world slowly began to fade. Children grew into adults without remembering the prosperous days before the great eruption. The magnificent palaces still stood, but many rooms were no longer as busy as they had once been. Some buildings were repaired again and again after earthquakes, while others were quietly abandoned. Nature gradually reclaimed what people could no longer maintain. The Mycenaeans became more firmly established on Crete. They continued using parts of the old palaces, but they brought their own language, customs, and systems of government. Clay tablets written in Linear B replaced many of the mysterious records once written in Linear A. It was a quiet transformation, one that unfolded over many decades instead of a single dramatic moment. Even as political power changed, everyday life continued. Farmers still harvested olives and grapes beneath the warm Mediterranean sun. Shepherds guided their flocks through rocky hills, and fishermen launched their boats before sunrise. The island remained beautiful, but the civilization that had made it famous was becoming a memory rather than a living reality. Centuries later, even those memories began to disappear. The great palaces collapsed after repeated earthquakes and fires. Their colorful frescoes were buried beneath broken stone and drifting soil. Wind carried dust across abandoned courtyards, while wild plants grew through cracked walls that had once echoed with music, ceremonies, and lively conversation. By the time ancient Greek writers told stories about King Minos, the labyrinth, and the Minotaur, the true history of the Minoans had already been forgotten. Real places became legends, and real people became mythical characters. History slowly transformed into folklore, preserving tiny pieces of truth inside unforgettable stories. For more than 3,000 years, Europe's first great civilization rested silently beneath the earth. Travelers crossed the island without realizing they were walking above enormous palaces. Farmers planted crops over buried staircases and hidden courtyards. The Minoans had not simply disappeared. They had been covered by time itself, waiting patiently for the day when someone would uncover their forgotten world once again. For thousands of years, the ruins remained hidden beneath layers of soil, stones, and wild grass. Seasons came and went without anyone knowing what rested below. Rain softened the earth, roots pushed through broken walls, and fallen ceilings protected countless objects from the outside world. Time slowly sealed the remains of the ancient civilization, almost like a carefully closed treasure chest. The people living on Crete built new homes, planted new fields, and created new communities. They walked across the buried palaces every day without realizing that magnificent halls, painted walls, and stone staircases lay only a few feet beneath their feet. The names of the old rulers disappeared, and even the language of the Minoans was completely forgotten. Ancient Greek writers preserved only fragments of the past. They told stories of King Minos, a powerful ruler who controlled the sea, and of a confusing labyrinth that trapped a fearsome creature known as the Minotaur. These tales entertained generations, but few people believed they contained real history. Most considered them nothing more than colorful myths passed from one storyteller to another. As centuries became millennia, Europe experienced the rise and fall of countless kingdoms. The Roman Empire expanded across the continent before collapsing. Medieval castles appeared on distant hills, and later, great cities grew across Europe. Through all of these changes, the remains of Knossos stayed hidden, untouched beneath the quiet landscape of Crete. It seemed as though the Minoans had vanished forever. Yet history has a remarkable way of waiting. Sometimes the greatest discoveries are not found in distant jungles or remote deserts, but beneath ordinary fields where people have lived for generations. The forgotten civilization was still there, preserved by accident and protected by time. It needed only one curious mind willing to dig beneath the surface. That moment would finally arrive at the beginning of the 20th century. An archaeologist, driven by determination and a belief that the old Greek legends contained a small piece of truth, would begin uncovering one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in European history. In the spring of 1900, a British archaeologist named Sir Arthur Evans arrived on Crete with an ambitious goal. He believed that the ancient stories of King Minos might have been inspired by a real civilization. Many scholars remained skeptical, but Evans was convinced that something extraordinary lay hidden beneath a low hill near the village of Knossos. The excavation began with simple tools, patient hands, and careful observation. Workers removed layer after layer of soil, expecting to find only scattered ruins. Instead, they uncovered stone walls, broad staircases, and large courtyards unlike anything previously discovered in Europe. Each passing day revealed another room, another corridor, and another piece of a civilization that had been forgotten for more than 3,000 years. Soon, colorful frescoes appeared beneath the dirt. Bright blue dolphins seemed to swim across ancient walls, while elegant figures dressed in flowing clothing walked through painted scenes of ceremonies and celebrations. Even after thousands of years underground, many colors remained surprisingly vivid. It was as though the artists had finished their work only yesterday. The discoveries continued. Hundreds of clay tablets covered with strange symbols emerged from storage rooms. Massive jars still stood where they had been left by ancient workers. Carefully carved seals, delicate jewelry, and beautifully painted pottery revealed a society of remarkable skill and sophistication. The forgotten world was slowly returning to the light. Evans named the civilization the Minoans, inspired by the legendary King Minos of Greek mythology. Although historians still debate some of his interpretations, his excavations transformed the study of European history forever. Before these discoveries, many believed that advanced civilization in Europe had begun with the ancient Greeks. Knossos told a very different story. Hidden beneath the quiet hills of Crete was evidence that a brilliant civilization had flourished many centuries earlier. Europe's first great civilization had not disappeared completely. It had simply waited, in silence and darkness, until the modern world was finally ready to remember it. The more archaeologists uncovered, the more surprising the Minoans became. Their palaces were not dark fortresses built only for defense. Instead, they were bright, open spaces filled with courtyards, staircases, workshops, and storage rooms. Sunlight reached deep into the buildings through carefully planned openings, while fresh air moved naturally through the halls. The designs reflected a civilization that valued comfort, organization, and daily life as much as power. One discovery amazed researchers more than almost anything else. Hidden beneath the floors were advanced drainage systems that carried wastewater away from the palace. Fresh water flowed through carefully built channels, supplying different parts of the complex. For a civilization that had flourished nearly 4,000 years ago, these engineering achievements were astonishing. They showed that the Minoans possessed practical knowledge far ahead of what many historians had expected. The artwork offered another glimpse into their world. Instead of endless scenes of kings defeating enemies, the walls displayed flowers blooming in warm sunlight, dolphins swimming through clear water, and young men and women taking part in graceful ceremonies. Nature appeared everywhere, suggesting that the sea, the seasons, and the land held deep importance in Minoan life. Yet many mysteries refused to disappear. The clay tablets written in Linear A remained unreadable. Scholars could recognize repeating symbols and patterns, but the language itself stayed silent. Without understanding their writing, historians could only guess at the thoughts, beliefs, and stories of the people who had created this remarkable civilization. Perhaps that is why the Minoans continue to fascinate us today. We can admire their buildings, study their art, and examine the objects they left behind, but we still cannot fully hear their own voices. Across thousands of years, they remain just beyond our reach, reminding us that even the greatest civilizations can leave behind questions that time has not yet allowed us to answer. As the discoveries at Knossos spread across the world, historians began to rethink the story of ancient Europe. For generations, many had believed that civilization on the continent truly began with classical Greece. The buried palaces of Crete told a much older story. Long before Athens reached its golden age, the Minoans had already built impressive cities, mastered long-distance trade, and created a culture unlike any other in Europe. Researchers compared artifacts found on Crete with objects discovered in Egypt, Cyprus, and the Near East. The similarities revealed an island deeply connected to the wider Mediterranean. Rather than living in isolation, the Minoans exchanged goods, ideas, and artistic styles with distant civilizations. Their ships had carried far more than cargo. They had carried knowledge across the sea. Even today, new excavations continue to uncover forgotten details. A broken cup, a small seal, or a fragment of painted plaster can change what historians believe about everyday life on Crete. Archaeology is often a slow and careful process, where even the smallest discovery adds another piece to an ancient puzzle that is still far from complete. Some questions, however, may never be answered. We still do not know exactly what language the Minoans spoke. We cannot read most of their written records, and many of their beliefs remain hidden behind symbols that refuse to reveal their meaning. Their greatest mysteries continue to rest in silence, waiting for a clue that may one day unlock their forgotten voices. Perhaps that mystery is the reason their civilization feels so timeless. The Minoans remind us that history is never completely finished. Beneath quiet fields, beneath ancient ruins, and beneath layers of forgotten time, there are still stories waiting to be discovered. And among them all, the people of Crete remain one of Europe's most remarkable reminders that greatness can disappear from memory, but never entirely from the earth itself. The story of the Minoans is not only a story of palaces and discoveries. It is also the story of ordinary people who lived thousands of years ago. Behind the impressive buildings and beautiful artwork were farmers, sailors, builders, artists, and families who experienced the same simple moments that people experience today. A farmer waking before sunrise would have walked through fields covered with olive trees and grapevines. The work was difficult, but the land provided food, materials, and a connection to the seasons. Harvest time brought communities together as people collected crops, prepared storage jars, and celebrated the results of months of effort. Along the coast, fishermen depended on the sea that surrounded their island. The Mediterranean was both a source of food and a pathway to the outside world. Small boats carried crews into deeper waters, where they searched for fish and returned with stories of distant shores. The sea shaped their identity and influenced almost every part of their culture. Inside workshops, skilled craftsmen created objects that required years of practice. A potter carefully shaped clay with steady hands, while another artist painted detailed scenes inspired by the natural world. These creations were not only valuable trade items, they were reflections of the patience, creativity, and imagination of the people who made them. Family life was likely centered around cooperation. Homes were places where meals were shared, tools were repaired, and stories were passed from older generations to younger ones. Although we may never know their names, these people were not simply characters from the distant past. They had hopes, worries, dreams, and daily routines just like anyone living today. The Minoans are often remembered because of their mysterious disappearance, but their true achievement was the world they created while they were alive. They built a society connected by the sea, inspired by nature, and shaped by human creativity. Their civilization disappeared from history for thousands of years, yet the quiet traces they left behind continue to tell their story. As historians continued studying the remains of Minoan society, they discovered that the strength of this civilization came from many small achievements working together. There was no single invention or event that made Crete powerful. Instead, it was the combination of farming, craftsmanship, trade, engineering, and cooperation that allowed the Minoans to flourish for centuries. Agriculture formed the foundation of their success. The island's warm climate was perfect for growing olives, grapes, and grains. Olive oil became one of their most valuable products, used not only for cooking but also for lamps, medicine, and trade. Vineyards covered parts of the landscape, producing wine that traveled across the Mediterranean and connected Crete with distant societies. The Minoans also understood the importance of organization. The great palaces were not built randomly. Every room had a purpose, from storing supplies to producing goods. Workers managed resources carefully, ensuring that communities had enough food and materials during different seasons. This careful planning allowed a large population to live together successfully. Their relationship with the natural world was also unique. The sea, mountains, forests, and animals appeared constantly in their artwork. Dolphins, bulls, flowers, and birds were not just decorations. They represented a deep connection between humans and the environment around them. The Minoans seemed to see beauty not as something separate from life, but as a part of everyday existence. Yet, even a successful civilization cannot control everything. Nature had already shown its power through earthquakes and the great volcanic disaster from Thera. The Minoans rebuilt and adapted, but each challenge placed more pressure on their society. Slowly, the balance that had supported their world began to weaken. Still, their achievements remained extraordinary. Long before many famous European kingdoms rose to power, the people of Crete had created a complex and sophisticated society. They proved that greatness does not always come from armies and conquest. Sometimes it comes from creativity, cooperation, and the quiet determination of ordinary people building something remarkable together. As centuries moved forward, the memory of the Minoans became softer and more distant. The people who later lived on Crete walked among the remains of an older world without fully understanding what had once existed there. Broken stones, buried walls, and forgotten objects became silent reminders of a civilization whose true story had almost disappeared. Ancient Greek storytellers preserved small pieces of the past through legends. They spoke of King Minos, the powerful ruler of Crete who controlled the seas. They told of a magnificent palace, a confusing maze, and a mysterious creature hidden within it. Over time, these stories changed with every generation, blending imagination with fragments of real memories. The truth behind the legends was hidden beneath the ground. The great palace at Knossos was no longer a center of power. Its halls became quiet, its courtyards filled with dust, and its painted walls slowly faded beneath layers of time. Nature returned to places where thousands of people had once gathered. Yet the influence of the Minoans did not completely vanish. Later Greek cultures inherited many ideas from them. Artistic styles, religious traditions, and stories of powerful sea kingdoms carried echoes of the earlier civilization. Even when people forgot the name of the Minoans, pieces of their world continued living through the cultures that followed. For modern historians, discovering the Minoans changed everything. They learned that Europe's history stretched much further back than previously believed. The continent's first great civilization was not a forgotten legend. It was a real society built by real people who worked, traded, created art, and dreamed of a better future. The journey to understand them is still continuing today. Every excavation, every artifact, and every scientific discovery brings historians a little closer to the people who once walked through the halls of Knossos. Their voices may remain quiet, but their story continues to rise from the earth, reminding us that no civilization truly disappears as long as someone remembers. The deeper researchers looked into Minoan history, the more they realized that disappearance does not always happen in a single dramatic moment. Civilizations often fade slowly, shaped by many different challenges that arrive one after another. For the Minoans, the great volcanic eruption, the destruction of coastal settlements, changing trade routes, and the rise of new powers all played a role in transforming their world. The island that had once been the heart of Mediterranean commerce became less dominant. Ships from other regions began controlling more of the important trade routes. The wealth that had flowed through Crete for generations became harder to maintain. The palaces continued functioning for a time, but they no longer held the same influence they once had. Inside those ancient buildings, life continued in a different way. Officials managed supplies, workers repaired damaged areas, and families carried on with their routines. But the feeling of an unstoppable golden age had passed. The confidence of earlier generations slowly gave way to adaptation and survival. The arrival of Mycenaean influence brought another major change. The mainland Greeks introduced new political structures and customs, gradually replacing many older Minoan traditions. The rediscovery of the Minoans changed the way people viewed the ancient world. Before the ruins of Crete were uncovered, many believed that Europe's earliest achievements belonged mainly to later civilizations. The discoveries at Knossos revealed something unexpected. A complex and creative society had existed thousands of years before the famous cities of classical Greece. Archaeologists continued studying the remains, carefully examining every object left behind. A small piece of pottery could reveal information about trade. A painted wall could show how people dressed, celebrated, or understood nature. Even tiny fragments of tools helped researchers imagine the daily lives of those who had lived on the island long ago. One of the most fascinating discoveries was the evidence of Minoan craftsmanship. Their artists created objects with incredible attention to detail. Jewelry was shaped with delicate precision, pottery carried elegant designs, and carved seals displayed scenes that required great patience and skill. These objects showed that beauty was not only reserved for important ceremonies but was part of everyday life. The Minoans also left behind clues about their connection with the sea. Their ships allowed them to travel across a large part of the Mediterranean world. Through these journeys, they exchanged goods and ideas with other cultures. Their influence reached far beyond the shores of Crete, proving that they were not an isolated island society, but an important part of the ancient world. Still, many parts of their story remain hidden. The unanswered questions create a sense of wonder that continues to attract historians and curious minds. Who were their rulers? What exactly did their ceremonies mean? What stories were written in their lost language? The answers may still be buried somewhere beneath the soil. As the quiet hills of Crete hold the remains of this ancient civilization, they remind us that history is full of forgotten chapters. The Minoans built a world filled with creativity and imagination, then disappeared into the shadows of time. Yet their story continues to return, slowly revealing itself one discovery at a time. Deep beneath the peaceful landscape of Crete, the remains of the Minoan world continue to rest as a reminder of how quickly human achievements can be forgotten. The stones of ancient buildings no longer echo with the voices of merchants, workers, and families, but they still carry the memory of the people who once created them. The Minoans lived in a time when the Mediterranean was a vast network of connections. The sea was not a barrier separating communities. It was a bridge bringing them together. Ships carried not only goods but also stories, traditions, and knowledge. A sailor arriving from a distant land might bring new ideas that would influence art, technology, or daily life on the island. This constant exchange helped Crete become one of the most advanced societies of its age. The people adapted ideas from others while creating their own unique style. Their buildings, artwork, and traditions reflected both outside influences and their own creativity. The result was a civilization unlike any other in the ancient world. But the passing of time changed everything. The once busy ports became quieter. The magnificent palaces lost their importance. The writing system that recorded their activities became unreadable. Slowly, the Minoans moved from reality into legend, remembered only through stories that were passed down by later generations. For centuries, no one knew that the legends were connected to a real civilization. The world had forgotten the people who built the first great European palaces, who created beautiful works of art, and who sailed across the Mediterranean long before many famous kingdoms rose to power. Yet the earth preserved their secrets. Beneath layers of soil and stone, their homes, tools, and artwork waited patiently. The silence of thousands of years could not erase everything. Every discovery brought their world back into focus, allowing modern people to look into a distant past and see the traces of a civilization that once filled the Mediterranean with life. The more we learn about the Minoans, the clearer it becomes that their greatest achievement was not a single palace or a single invention. Their true achievement was the way they created a connected and organized society in a world without modern technology. They built communities where farming, trade, art, and cooperation worked together to support thousands of people. Their cities were carefully planned. Roads connected important areas, storage rooms protected valuable supplies, and workshops allowed skilled workers to create objects that traveled across the sea. Every part of their society depended on countless individuals doing their work with patience and dedication. The people who carried stones to build palaces, the farmers who produced food, the sailors who crossed dangerous waters, and the artists who decorated walls all contributed to the success of Minoan civilization. History often remembers rulers and famous figures, but civilizations are truly built by ordinary people whose names are lost forever. The Minoan relationship with nature was also unique. Their artwork shows a deep appreciation for the world around them. Flowers, animals, and the sea appeared again and again in their creations. They seemed to understand that human life was connected with the natural environment, not separate from it. However, the same natural world that gave them beauty also brought destruction. Earthquakes, volcanic activity, and changing conditions tested their ability to survive. The Minoans showed remarkable strength by rebuilding after disasters, but even the strongest societies can eventually be transformed by forces beyond their control. Today, when visitors walk through the ruins of Knossos, they are not simply looking at old stones. They are standing where people once laughed, worked, celebrated, and dreamed. The silent corridors still hold the feeling of a world that existed thousands of years ago. The Minoans remind us that every civilization has a story. Some stories are written in books, while others are written in stone, pottery, and the remains of forgotten cities. Their story survived because the earth remembered what humanity had forgotten. As modern technology improved, researchers gained new ways to understand the hidden world of the Minoans. Scientific methods allowed them to study ancient materials more carefully, revealing details that earlier generations could never have discovered. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, helped create a clearer picture of life on Crete thousands of years ago. Scientists examined ancient bones, plant remains, and objects found inside homes and palaces. These discoveries showed what people ate, how they traveled, and how they interacted with their environment. The results revealed a society that was deeply connected to the land and sea around them. The Minoans depended heavily on agriculture. Olive trees, grapevines, and grain fields provided essential resources for communities across the island. Farmers followed the rhythms of nature, understanding when to plant and when to harvest. Their work supported not only their own families but also the larger economic system that allowed cities and palaces to grow. At the same time, the sea remained the center of their identity. The Mediterranean connected Crete with distant civilizations, creating opportunities that few societies of that time could match. Minoan sailors were among the most experienced travelers of the ancient world, carrying their culture across hundreds of miles of open water. Yet the mystery surrounding their disappearance continues to capture attention. Unlike civilizations destroyed by a single invasion or a famous battle, the Minoan decline happened gradually. Their story is a reminder that history is often shaped by many small changes rather than one unforgettable moment. The quiet ruins of Crete still hold countless unanswered questions. Somewhere beneath the soil may be more evidence waiting to be found. A forgotten room, an unreadable inscription, or a simple object could reveal something new about these ancient people. For now, the Minoans remain both known and unknown. We can see their achievements clearly, but their deepest thoughts remain hidden. They left behind a civilization full of beauty and imagination, yet they also left behind one of history's most fascinating mysteries. The story of the Minoans continues to remind us that even the most successful civilizations are never guaranteed to last forever. Their rise was built on creativity, cooperation, and a deep understanding of the world around them. Their decline came through a combination of natural disasters, changing powers, and the slow movement of history. When we imagine ancient civilizations, we often picture great armies, powerful kings, and dramatic battles. But the Minoans offer a different picture. Their greatness came from ships crossing peaceful waters, artists creating beautiful images, farmers caring for the land, and communities working together to build a remarkable society. Their palaces were not only places of power. They were centers of human activity where thousands of people contributed to a shared way of life. Every stored jar of olive oil, every painted piece of pottery, and every carved seal represented the effort of someone whose name has been lost to time. Perhaps the most touching part of the Minoan story is that they were ordinary people living extraordinary moments without knowing it. A sailor preparing for a voyage could never imagine that his journey would be studied thousands of years later. An artist painting a wall could never know that future generations would admire those colors after centuries of darkness. History is filled with such forgotten voices. Most people who shaped the past were never recorded in written documents. They left behind only small traces of their existence. Yet those traces are enough to remind us that they lived, worked, loved, and hoped for the future. Today, the ruins of Crete stand quietly beneath the Mediterranean sun. The same waves that once carried Minoan ships still touch the island's shores. The same mountains still rise above the landscape. The same olive trees continue growing in the warm soil. The world changed, kingdoms disappeared, and languages were forgotten. But the memory of Europe's first great civilization continues to survive, carried forward through the stones, paintings, and discoveries that brought the Minoans back into human history. As the story of the Minoans reached modern audiences, people around the world became fascinated by this forgotten civilization. Museums displayed their pottery, jewelry, and artwork, allowing millions of visitors to see the creativity of a people who had lived thousands of years before them. Objects that once rested silently underground now became windows into an ancient world. Every artifact carried a small piece of information. A painted vase revealed what animals and plants were important to them. A tool showed how they worked. A seal displayed symbols connected to their daily activities. Archaeologists carefully studied these objects, knowing that even the smallest discovery could change the way we understand the past. One of the greatest challenges remained their mysterious writing. The symbols of Linear A continued to resist translation. Scholars compared it with other ancient languages, searched for patterns, and examined thousands of examples, but the full meaning remained hidden. It was like hearing a voice from thousands of years ago but being unable to understand the words. Still, the silence of their writing did not erase their achievements. The buildings they created, the art they produced, and the connections they formed across the Mediterranean spoke clearly. The Minoans had created a society that valued skill, beauty, and cooperation. Their story also teaches an important lesson about memory. A civilization does not need to be remembered by everyone to have been important. For thousands of years, the Minoans were almost completely forgotten, yet they had once influenced the ancient world in remarkable ways. Time can hide the achievements of people, but it cannot completely remove them. Beneath the earth, their homes waited. Inside buried rooms, their artwork survived. Through careful research and patience, their forgotten world slowly returned. The Minoans may no longer have cities filled with people or ships crossing the Mediterranean, but their legacy continues. Every discovery brings them closer to us, allowing their quiet story to be heard once again after thousands of years of silence. The ancient island of Crete now feels peaceful, almost timeless. Visitors walking among the ruins of Knossos often find it difficult to imagine that this quiet place was once filled with the sounds of a powerful civilization. The footsteps of merchants, workers, and families once echoed through these halls. Today, only the gentle wind and distant sounds of nature remain. Yet the stones still tell their story. The wide courtyards reveal where people gathered. The storage rooms show how carefully resources were managed. The faded paintings offer glimpses of celebrations, nature, and daily life. Every corner of the palace carries a memory of the people who built it. The Minoans were not remembered because they conquered large territories or created the biggest armies. They were remembered because they created something unique. They showed that a civilization could become powerful through connection, creativity, and knowledge rather than constant warfare. Their ships connected different worlds. Their artists transformed simple materials into beautiful works of art. Their engineers created systems that surprised modern researchers. Their farmers supported communities that grew into one of the earliest advanced societies in Europe. But perhaps the most interesting part of their story is how close they came to being lost forever. Without archaeology, the Minoans might have remained only a few lines in ancient myths. Their real cities, their achievements, and their daily lives could have stayed hidden beneath the ground for many more centuries. The discovery of their civilization changed history. It reminded the world that the past is much larger than the stories we already know. There are countless forgotten chapters waiting to be uncovered, and sometimes the greatest stories are the ones that disappeared first. As the sun sets over Crete today, the landscape looks almost the same as it did thousands of years ago. The mountains stand quietly, the sea continues moving along the coast, and the island still holds the memory of Europe's first great civilization. A civilization that was forgotten, but never truly lost. The final centuries of Minoan influence were filled with change. The world around Crete was no longer the same world their ancestors had known. New kingdoms were rising, old trade routes were shifting, and different cultures were becoming more powerful across the Aegean Sea. The people of Crete adapted as they always had. They continued farming the land, creating goods, and maintaining their communities. But the confidence of earlier generations, when Minoan ships dominated Mediterranean trade, slowly became a memory. The island was no longer the unquestioned center of the ancient world. The Mycenaean civilization from mainland Greece grew stronger and began playing a larger role in the region. Their influence reached Crete, bringing new customs and a different style of administration. Over time, the old Minoan way of life blended with new traditions, creating a changing society. The great palaces that had once represented the heart of Minoan power became symbols of a past age. Some areas continued to be used, while others were gradually abandoned. Fires, earthquakes, and years of neglect slowly damaged the magnificent buildings that had once welcomed merchants from distant lands. Yet even as their political influence faded, the spirit of the Minoans remained. Their artistic ideas continued inspiring later cultures. Their stories became part of Greek mythology. Their relationship with the sea influenced generations of sailors who followed the same Mediterranean routes. History often remembers the beginning and the end of civilizations, but the quiet years in between are just as important. The Minoans did not disappear in one dramatic moment. Their civilization transformed slowly, like a sunset that changes the sky one color at a time. By the time later Greek societies rose to greatness, the Minoans had already become part of the distant past. Their cities were silent, their language was forgotten, and their names had faded away. But beneath the earth of Crete, their story remained patiently waiting for someone to uncover it again. After thousands of years of silence, the Minoans returned to the pages of history. Their discovery changed not only what people knew about Crete, but also how they understood the beginning of European civilization. The ruins beneath the soil proved that remarkable achievements could exist long before the famous empires that usually receive attention. The story of the Minoans is a reminder that history is not always preserved in written records. Sometimes it survives through broken pottery, faded paintings, forgotten buildings, and small objects left behind by ordinary people. These pieces may seem simple, but together they can reveal an entire world. Today, archaeologists continue studying the remains of this ancient civilization. New technologies allow researchers to examine old discoveries in new ways, uncovering details that were impossible to see before. Every generation adds another piece to the unfinished story of the Minoans. Although many mysteries remain, we know enough to understand their importance. They were skilled sailors, talented artists, careful builders, and creative thinkers. They created one of the earliest complex societies in Europe and connected the Mediterranean world through trade and culture. Perhaps the most beautiful part of their story is that they did not need enormous armies or endless battles to become great. Their legacy came from curiosity, craftsmanship, and cooperation. They built a civilization where beauty and practicality existed together. The Minoans were forgotten because time moved on. New kingdoms replaced old ones, languages changed, and memories disappeared. But the earth protected their story until the world was ready to hear it again. As the evening light falls over the ancient ruins of Crete, it is easy to imagine the distant sounds of the past. The voices of merchants, the footsteps of workers, the laughter of families, and the quiet creativity of artists. The civilization that vanished thousands of years ago still speaks through what it left behind. Tonight, as our journey through the forgotten world of the Minoans comes to an end, we return once more to the peaceful shores of ancient Crete. The waves continue to move gently along the coastline, just as they did thousands of years ago when Minoan ships sailed toward distant lands. The people who lived here could never have imagined that their civilization would one day disappear from memory. They built homes, created art, raised families, and worked together believing that their world would continue forever. Like all people throughout history, they lived their lives without knowing what the future would bring. Their palaces eventually became ruins. Their language became silent. Their names faded away. For centuries, the Minoans existed only as shadows in old legends and forgotten stories. Yet beneath the earth, their civilization remained, waiting patiently for another age to discover it. When archaeologists uncovered Knossos and revealed the remains of this ancient society, they did more than find old buildings. They recovered a lost chapter of human history. They showed the world that Europe's story began much earlier than many had imagined. The Minoans remind us that greatness is not always measured by how long something lasts. A civilization can disappear, yet still leave behind ideas, beauty, and inspiration that survive for thousands of years. Their achievements continue to influence historians, artists, and anyone who wonders about the mysteries of the ancient world. Perhaps somewhere beneath the soil of Crete, there are still secrets waiting to be uncovered. Perhaps forgotten rooms, hidden objects, or unreadable writings still hold stories that have not yet been told. And maybe that is what makes history so fascinating. The past is never completely gone. It rests quietly beneath our feet, carried in the stones, the earth, and the memories of those who choose to search. So tonight, as you close your eyes and imagine the calm Mediterranean breeze passing over the ancient island, remember the civilization that once shone brightly before disappearing into time. Europe's first great civilization was forgotten for thousands of years, but it was never truly lost.